Welcome to John Martin Talks, where we battle ignorance and apathy daily. The growing ignorance of just how special this experiment we call the United States of America is, and the apathy that we can't or won't do anything and everything to save her. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we got a great show for you today. We're going to start out talking a little bit about the riots that happened in Minneapolis and a spillover, so to speak, into LA and all that's surrounding that. We're going to have a brief conversation. I'm going to essentially give you my take on it to this point. And then we're going to get into several stories more in depth. And one of them is about the border wall. Apparently, it is gaining steam in Texas right now, mainly around the confiscation, if you will, of land to build the border wall. Apparently, the Trump administration has been a lot busier trying to get the wall done than what we're being led to believe in the mainstream media, and I'll explain that in just a moment. And then the Democrats, man, they are trying to make the courts, or the fact that President Trump is packing the courts, and they're not even talking about the Supreme Court, because of course that would be just off the chain if President Trump gets another Supreme Court nomination. But they're talking about how President Trump and Mitch McConnell have essentially been able to nominate like 200 federal judges to the bench. And it's going to be a 2020 issue if the Democrats have their way, led by old Chucky Schumer. So we'll expand upon that. And then we'll talk about a little bit of a sad, if you will, story about the new normal, if you will. I hate that term, but it is a term that is being used a lot in reference to our colleges and our kids and some of the trauma that they are going through, whether it is deserved or not, and we'll talk about that. But we start out today with a story about the riots in Minneapolis, and like as I say, I'm only going to touch base on it because it's being covered wall to wall by every network right now, and so I don't think I need to add too much on that. If you're not sure what I'm talking about, several days ago there was a black man that was arrested in Minneapolis by 4 police officers. Ultimately, it started out with a couple, ended up being 4. I'm sure you've seen the video. We're not going to play it right now. It'd be easy to find. But essentially, there's 2 videos. One shows them making the initial arrest, and then the other shows this police officer, a white police officer with a black suspect, handcuffed on the ground behind a police car, and the police officer, it really looks like he's almost posing with his knee on the man's neck. The man complains that he can't breathe. He's not apparently resisting arrest, and their 3 other officers don't do anything about it, and the black man, ultimately died. You could not ask for a worse video or picture, if you will, of textbook police brutality to a black man than that. Here's the thing on it. I have not heard one person, not one, let alone any credible person, defend what the cops have done there. In fact, I've heard from multiple police officers, some personally and some over the airwaves, that are just dismayed by this. And they are not only say that everything that was done in that video was wrong, they feel for the man. And of course, they fear for their own lives, because this puts police officers in a terrible light and actually threatens the lives of officers all over the nation. So we need to keep that in mind. And I don't blame African Americans or Americans in general for being just absolutely furious at this video. As I say, I am as well. And I've had personal experience with this. I don't talk about it too much because, it's not really a topic of the show. But I am married to a woman who is of mixed race, and she has several all grown black children. I have 3 black sons. I'm really basically their stepfather, but I've had good relationships with them, and I have had to talk with them about these issues, about the fear. You could, and I'm just telling you, you could argue whether the fear is justified or not. I'm not going to get into that right now. I'm telling you, the fear is real. It is absolutely real. Young black men in America are, in a sense, terrified. Not all of them, but basically all of them have some aspect of fear of what might happen when the police are involved, especially white police officers. It is just a fact. Whether it is justified, we could debate about it, but it is a fact. And this video, what happened in Minneapolis, at least, there's always more to these stories than meets the eye, and I'll grant you that. And there's been plenty of them, like the hands up, don't shoot, thing in Ferguson, which was total BS. So we've had our full of that. And of course, President Obama and the progressive Democrats always pour gas to these fires, and they're certainly taking advantage of this now. But the fear is real. What happened in Minneapolis needs to be thoroughly investigated. As far as I can tell, the appropriate steps are being taken. All 4 police officers were fired. And keep in mind, and I heard this from police officers, I feel comfortable saying this, if one of them is guilty of that, the other 3 are guilty of not stopping that officer, who no one I've heard says didn't go much too far. But the officers have been fired. They are in investigation at the state and local level, and President Trump has directed the FBI and the Department of Justice to investigate this as well. So now whether or not that's sufficient, whether they should be immediately arrested, that certainly is something worthy of consideration and protest. And if there was ever anything to legitimately protest, it would be what happened in Minneapolis a few days ago. The big problem I have is, and maybe I'm wrong, so chime in on Facebook, let me know. Protests are one thing. I don't see how burning down a store, looting a Target, and stacking up TVs and running out the building with them helps anything at all. It destroys the very neighborhood that the people are protesting they are trying to save. So I just want to put that out there. And I'm hoping that President Trump, I think he's done the right thing. I think he's going to need to make a stronger statement, in my opinion. It's a golden opportunity, and I'm not trying to make it about that, but it's just a political fact. It is a great opportunity for the president to show leadership. Not saying he hasn't, but I think he could step it up just a little bit and essentially ask the people for patience and calm and to stop what they're doing. And we need to enforce the law in spite of the egregious behavior of those police officers in Minneapolis. So I hope you will take that with the spirit with what it is delivered to, and I am praying for all of those concerned, including the family of the young man or the man that was lost. And I'm praying for those police officers too, that they actually see the light, and I pray for police officers all the time around the country, because this incident in Minneapolis hurts them a great deal, and they know it, and it hurts the heart of America. And once again, I'll close with this. I have not heard one single person justify anything that has happened there. I'm sure there's some out there. I just have not heard them. All right, we're going to move along now, and we're going to talk about a story out of Texas, and this is a Wall Street Journal story. Push to build border wall gains steam in Texas. Tony Medina sat at a desk in his home last week, this is in Laredo, Texas, surrounded by toolboxes and photos of his family. In front of him was a neatly printed 4-page statement he had prepared for his virtual hearing to explain to a federal judge why he doesn't want the property he has owned for more than 40 years, and it's along the Rio Grande River, 40 years to be taken by the U.S. government for a border wall. Now, this is something rarely actually talked about. The building of the wall is put in simplistic terms. It is actually a very complicated issue. Now, when I say simplistic terms, I am not inferring that President Trump has done that. I mean, his political deal about build the wall and all that is a very simplistic statement, but the most effective political slogans are simplistic. So that's just politics in general. But President Trump is very aware of the complications of building the wall, and this story kind of reveals that his administration has been on top of this for some time now. But this one thing that, as I say, is rarely talked about is the idea of eminent domain and how that plays into any government structure, really, but certainly in building this wall. It's very complicated. This story will reveal some of that. I have had personal experience with the federal government, actually mostly with the state government, the Department of Transportation. They expanded a road in my area, and it affected greatly several pieces of property I owned, and I had to negotiate with them. And I am not trying to, I'm going to stand up for the landowners in Texas. You don't have to give the government anything without a due process. So the fact that some of these people are voluntarily complying and some of them are taking the federal government to court, I don't have an issue either way with it, because it is your land, and it is a big deal when the federal government or any government, state and local, come and take a person's property. It is a huge deal. And so I don't have any fault with a landowner standing up for what they believe, standing up for their property, politics aside. I really don't. But it does complicate the process. Mr. Medina's hearing last week was the first to be held telephonically. In other words, they're holding virtual hearings now because, obviously, of the pandemic deal, the COVID-19. In the government's race to survey land in the Laredo area for a border wall, it says, will block illegal immigration and smuggling. I think that's no doubt that it will slow that down. While the coronavirus pandemic has paused or delayed many legal proceedings, court actions by the U.S. government, let me expand this just a hair, sorry about that. The dangers of live TV, a little technical glitch there. While the coronavirus pandemic has paused or delayed many legal proceedings, court actions by the U.S. government to take private property for the wall have accelerated in recent months. Well, the president is trying to keep his promise. Now, you could argue that the president should have done more sooner, and I'm with you on that. I think President Trump should have prioritized this a bit more. But the mainstream media and even some conservatives, I mean, Ann Coulter has basically disowned Trump over this issue, and some others, have actually, I think, over-criticized the president, because the president has been working behind the scenes to make this wall a reality. And if you thought it's something that could just poof overnight, let me just put it this way. Even if President Trump had great support from Congress and the media, which obviously he has not, even from Republicans, but even if he did, it would take years to go through this process of securing the land alone, let alone actually building the wall. That is just the way it is. And it is constitutional. It is our constitutional right to own our property, and it should be tough for the government to take our property. It absolutely should be. Since March, the government has filed 24 federal cases against South, most of it replacing existing walls or fences. Well, first of all, they needed to be replaced. And secondly, they built the wall in places where they already own the property. That only makes sense. And they were put up in places of high traffic, high volume, and they were in very much need of repair. So to me, it's not a criticism to say that President Trump has focused on building the wall where he could and shoring up the wall where he should. 3 miles of the wall have been constructed where none was before, according to this article. The government has plans to build 731 miles at a cost of $15 billion. Now, you could be sad about this. You could be angry about all of this, the fact that not more has been done. And I get it. I absolutely get it, and I'm with you. I do believe without a doubt that President Trump could have done more to keep this particular promise. I'm not beating him or taking him to the mat over it, because it is much more complicated than would meet the eye. And also, he has had virtually zero support outside of the American people who supported him. The media has been trashing him over it. Obviously, Congress, with led under Nancy Pelosi in the House, have just been adamantly opposed to it, fought him at every bit. And the Republicans, quite frankly, have been lukewarm to this from the beginning, because the Chamber of Commerce crowd in the Republican side wants cheap labor, and the Democrats want, vote jumpers, people jumping over the wall to vote. So there's an unholy alliance against President Trump, and he has struggled with it. But I will say that the president has, in effect, built a virtual wall in places. And what I mean by that is by not doing the catch and release, to making sure that people, if they are seeking asylum, they have to stay in Mexico, getting Mexico to put troops on the south and on the northern end of their border. All of that has helped a great deal. And Mexico housing those people on their side of the border and actually paying for troops is, in effect, paying for the wall, even if it is, in a sense, a virtual wall. Is that enough? No, absolutely not. But it is something that the president gets very little credit for, and he deserves. Keep in mind what is going to happen if Joe Biden actually wins the presidency. Well, I think we know we're going to have an open border policy without a doubt, and we're going to have a flood. The wall will stop, and we'll have a flood of immigrants like this country has never seen, celebrating. They'll be ready to celebrate Joe Biden's inauguration. If you don't believe me, then all you need to do is look at this video clip we're going to play in just a moment from the 2020 debate. This is when there still were like 20 people running. This was, they broke it up into 2 nights of 10. I want you to notice that every single Democrat raises their hand about giving free medical care to illegal immigrants, which what do you think that would do to people flowing across the border? And even old presumptive Uncle Joe Biden, creepy Uncle Joe, goes, yeah, I'm for it. Check it out.
You have been talking tonight about these government health care plans that you've proposed in one form or another. This is a show of hands question, and hold them up for a moment so people can see. Raise your hand if your government plan would provide coverage for undocumented immigrants.
There's old Joe. There's your presumptive nominee. And as I say, the Democrats, man, if they get power, the least of our worries is going to be the wall or not, because it ain't going to happen. And the immigrants are going to flood across our border like never before at the worst possible time, because we still are needing jobs for Americans. So it is going to be hell to pay if the Democrats win. The best chance we have of completing that wall, and once again, I am being critical of President Trump. He needs to do more, but our best shot is for Trump to get reelected, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. The U.S. Customs and Border Protection said in an email that cases have accelerated, talking about these eminent domain cases, after funding for the Laredo area was allocated late in 2019. Well, so they got funds in 2019. Think about that, man. Good for you, Mr. President. I don't know how they were able to do it. I don't even remember seeing that in the news. So kudos to the Trump administration. The agency, talking about the Border Patrol, Customs Border Patrol agency, said, we've been consistent about our need for a wall, and we are full steam ahead. As I say, it will all come to an end if Biden wins. There is no doubt about it. Let's get into a little bit of specifics here. Of the 250 landowners in the path of the 69 miles of border wall planned for Laredo area, about half have signed rights of entry to allow government to survey the wall for the wall. So what the first step is for the government to actually has to have permission to come on this property. Whether they obtain the property or not is a separate issue, but they have to come on and do a survey of the area so they can see what if it's feasible for the wall and what amount of land they would need. It's the same thing that happened when I was talking to you about when a highway came through my area. I had to give them permission to get on my land to survey first. But they said, so 200, think about that, 250 landowners, excuse me, which means 250 separate court cases. So it's complicated. And as I say, I have no issue with people taking the government to court over the confiscation of the eminent domain procedure of their land. That is the way it should be. It should be very difficult and very complicated for the government to take your property. It should be. So I'm not opposed to the landowners. If owners are unwilling to give up the land voluntarily, the government must sue them in federal court twice. They have to do it twice. First, for the right to go on there and survey, and second, for the actual taking of the property. So you could, if they're fighting it, now not all of them are fighting it, but it could be 250 times 2 court cases. So it could be 500 just on this 69 miles. So this is a complicated issue, and people deserve their right. American citizens who own property deserve the due process. I'm not arguing about that at all. Said Ivy Lee, a spokesman for Texas Civil Rights Project, a nonprofit group that represents many landowners, so this is a lawyer, said, "We had naively hoped the government would put a pause or a moratorium on this, but instead they sped ahead." So what they're talking about is with this, and they said this they just shouldn't be doing these hearings during a pandemic. So they're saying that, hey, we were hoping the government be distracted by this is lawyers talking, and they get paid by the word and by the hour, so they're going to talk and take as much time as possible. But they're saying they hope that the court would have put these aside because of the pandemic. And here's the thing. I agree with these attorneys on this point, that this is a bad time to be doing it. But my solution would have been they should have done this 2-3 years ago. So the fact that it's taken this long to get to this point is my criticism. The fact that they're willing to plow ahead during a pandemic era is just the way it is. Everybody expects everything else to work during this, but the courts know. So I applaud them for doing that. Landowners rarely, if ever, succeed as the government, talking about in these hearings. It's very difficult to beat the government in these issues. Landowners rarely, if ever, succeed as the government has broad authority to take land for national security purposes. And I 100% agree with that broad authority. What I have a problem with eminent domain is when the government uses it to pick winners and losers. I remember there was a case in Alabama a few years ago where it was a Walmart, I believe. It could have been a Kmart. I'm pretty sure it was a Walmart. And the local government used eminent domain to take people's property. Most people were living in a trailer park to build a big complex for Walmart there. To me, I am adamantly opposed to that. The government should never take your property for the use of some other private individual or corporation. And they made it sound like it was in the good of the community for tax purposes and economics. That's not the reason to take your property. If there is something like a road, a wall, a dam, something like that, something that the government needs, a military base, the list is long, then yes, absolutely, the government has the right to do it, should have the right to do it, and it's in the Constitution. Anything that other than something like that, then I'm adamantly opposed to it. But landowners rarely, if ever, succeed as the government has broad authority to take land for national security purposes. Those who fight do so on principles to delay process in case of political and funding realities change or to try to increase payment for the land. I don't have a problem with that. I don't have a problem with landowners trying to get the top dollar they possibly can for their property. And I don't have an issue with people just saying, hey, I'll donate the land, which actually happens sometime, and for taxes and everything else. It is a long process, and it should be. The fact that we need the wall does not circumvent the due process of American citizens and property owners in the United States. I don't have a problem with it being a long process. I just wish they'd have started sooner. It's so complicated that there are firms, lawyers that specialize in nothing but this, and that probably doesn't surprise you. And the government ultimately pays pretty good price for this, and in most cases, they have to put your attorney fees and everything else, and that there are some variances of that. I support the wall, as you've heard me say before, but if I say it bears repeating. Build the wall. It's better for us all. It may hurt individual landowners that want to secure their property, and there's some heartbreaking kind of stories about people who have owned some of this land for generations. They're going to be cut off from the river, and I sympathize with them. But for the greater good of the security of this nation, we need the wall now more than ever. And the only way it's going to get finished is if Trump 2020. Trump needs to win in order to finish the wall. Argue all you want, Ms. Coulter, about how much he's done. Without Donald Trump, there'd be none. And with Joe Biden, they'll probably tear down whatever wall we got. So ultimately in this, I'm waiting for Trump to be unleashed. You know, they're worried about Trump becoming unhinged. And I am so excited that in 2020, when Trump wins re-election with your help, we don't take anything for granted, that he will be unleashed and the wall will get finished. All right, we're going to move along. This is a story out of the Hill, and the Democrats, especially old Chucky Schumer, are beside themselves when they've woken up now and realized that while they were talking about all kind of stuff, trying to impeach the president, all this ridiculous nonsense, the president was focused on a big goal that will live long after his presidency, whether it's one term or two terms or 3 or 4 terms. Oh my God, he's never going to leave the White House. I mean, I throw that out there because they just get crazy. We talked about that. By the way, if you want to watch our podcast, there's quite a few ways to do it. One, you could go directly to John Martin Talks Facebook page, like it, share it with others. We got a Twitter handle. I forgot to introduce my guest here, my co-host, Billy Bob Bass. He doesn't say much, but he keeps me straight. He has a Twitter handle, by the way. It's at Billy Bob Bass 1, and mine is at John Martin Talks. Of course, a good way to look at our show, especially archived, is on our YouTube page. You just spell it out, John Martin Talks. It pops up there. Subscribe to it. We'd really appreciate some more views there. Of course, check out America's Voice News. We're broadcast there live on Facebook every morning. Good morning. Howdy. How y'all doing? And we're rebroadcast across their entire network, which includes Roku, Apple TV, Fire Stick, and Channel 219 Dish Network, Pluto Channel. They have a free app on Android and iPhone. Download all that, America's Voice News. Check us out on that as well. We are literally nationwide, worldwide, and through Dish Network Channel 219, universal. But on with the story. Democrats warn of captured GOP court ahead of November election. Senate Democrats are turning their focus to courts ahead of November, warning that Republicans and President Trump have captured the federal judiciary. God, I hope that's true, don't you? I mean, if we have captured the federal judiciary, if Trump did nothing else, and of course he's done a lot, if he did nothing else, man, that would be a legacy, that, as I say, that would live past the 5th Trump presidency, let alone the 2 that he's going to have. But God, I hope that is true, man. I'm just praying that the Democrats are finally right about something. The strategy comes as the courts have emerged as a lightning rod during the Trump administration, like they haven't been already. The Democrats, man, and I'll get into that in just a minute, the lightning rod during the Trump administration that increasingly fires up Democratic voters in the wake of recent high-profile court battles. Well, the Democrats have always understood the power of the courts. Quite often, it's conservatives who have lacked this. I give Mitch McConnell and President Trump certainly some credit for focusing on this, but the Democrats know that much of their agenda would never pass legislatively. They've always relied on the courts to get their agenda pushed, and they still are. So that's why they're kind of freaking out a little bit about this. But if you think that the Democrats are crazy now, and boy, have they been crazy, what's going to happen if Donald Trump actually wins re-election and gets to appoint at least one? There's no doubt in my mind he's going to get to appoint at least one more Supreme Court justice, and possibly 2 or 3, especially if he serves in a second term. So they went pretty crazy. You want to know just how crazy the Democrats are about the court system? Remember this scene from the Kavanaugh, when Judge Kavanaugh was literally being sworn in behind the doors of the Supreme Court. Do you remember this video? Check it out.
The front door of the Supreme Court, I don't recall ever seeing a scene like this. Obviously, a lot of passion in this crowd. Whether or not this carries over to November is a distinction that nobody is really concerned with at the minute. It's getting hard to hear in here as we wade into the crowd, but just an extraordinary moment, Joy, capping 2 weeks of civil action, of civil unrest, of protesters confronting senators as they...
Did you hear, by the way, side note, what they were actually chanting there? We believe survivors. We believe believe survivors. Talking about Blasey Ford believing her over Judge Kavanaugh. It's funny how they believe survivors unless they're accusing Joe Biden. Then they're trying to trash that. Did you see? I hadn't done a story on it. We may talk about it as it unfolds a couple days from now. But apparently there is a judge in a court that is going after the lady that accused Mr. Biden on saying that she lied under oath under some type of expert witness job she had a few years ago. So they're out. I'm not even getting to whether she's guilty or innocent, but clearly they are out to discredit that poor woman. They don't believe survivors if they're attacking Democrats. As I say, if you're new to the show, you may not have heard this, but if you have, it bears repeating. There is no double standard. There's only one standard, and it applies to Trump, his supporters, and conservatives in general. They're held to whatever standard the media wants to hold them to. The other people, there's no standard whatsoever, man. Just like the difference between protesters and rioters and looters, there's no difference, right? According to the mainstream media, they're just protesting by stealing TVs and burning down a AutoZone. But anyway, I digress. All right, let's move along. Senate Minority Leader Charles Schumer of New York, old Chucky. Let's just pray. If we don't get any other prayers answered, let's get the prayer answered that Chuck Schumer stays minority leader and never becomes majority leader ever again. This is what old Chucky said. Will it be an important issue in the campaign, talking about these benches? Absolutely, he says. Average folks who see their rights being taken away by the courts, particularly on health care, are able to see what the courts are doing. Do you remember Chuck a few months back before the COVID thing hit really bad when he was up there and he basically at the Supreme Court steps was threatening the Republican judges, appointed judges like Kavanaugh, that you're going to rue the day, we're going to get you and all that kind of stuff. And, basically other than some people like us here didn't get much call out for that. But Chucky, he understands the power of the courts, but he's talking about health care. So he doesn't get specific in this. So is he talking about like Obamacare health care? Because Obamacare wouldn't exist without Justice Roberts, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, appointed by George Bush Jr., that, he gave us Obamacare when he ruled opposite even the way the Obama administration did. But that's another story. So is he talking about that, or is he talking about abortion? Because abortion is totally done by the courts, and that is a woman's health care issue. I'm still struggling with that, and I don't pretend to understand women's health care issues, but someone out there help me out. Chime in on whatever Facebook network you're listening to. I'll respond to you as quickly as I can. How in general, now I realize if there's a pregnancy complication, that's a different story, but how in general is abortion on demand actually a woman's health care issue? I still have yet to understand that. Schumer added that the hard right, I love that term, the hard right, is that, and me hard, man, I'm the hardwood truth. I wish I was a little harder than I am, man. I'm still a bit flabby here. Schumer added that the hard right had focused for decades on trying to remake the federal judiciary, saying it's a plan that will really hurt the average American, and we aim to both expose it and do whatever we can to stop it. So what is the definition of the hard right? I guess it's anyone who opposes them, because if you don't agree lock, stop, 100% with the progressive agenda led by people like Chuck Schumer, then you are, I guess, hard right. Maybe we're just right, and that's hard for you to take. That's probably the real thing. Democrats on Wednesday released a 54-page report on how Republicans had captured the courts. God, like I say, I hope that is true. And detailing the impact Republicans have had on the court, with nearly 200 judicial nominees confirmed since President Trump took office in 2017. Thank you, Mr. President. Hallelujah. Promises made, promises kept. Keep going, sir. Democrats wrote in the report, this is what they said in the report: it's time for America to reckon with the reality that our courts are being captured. It's time for Americans to understand the extent of the apparatus pursuing the capture. We just captured the court. And to understand who is behind the apparatus. Well, me and Billy Bob probably. It's long past time to look behind the curtain. Was it like Wizard of Oz? Nothing less than our democracy is at stake. Well, I don't know about the democracy being at stake, but I can guarantee you if Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, and old bloated Joe Biden somehow floats across the finish line, that our republic will be at stake without a doubt. Senate Democratic report also targets Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell's work on confirming Trump's judicial nominees, accusing him of turning the chamber, talking about the Senate, into a conveyor belt for getting court picks through the chamber. Well, thank you, Mitch. I'm not a big fan of old Turtlehead. That's what I call him, Mitch McConnell. Kind of look like I got a turtle head poking out. You remember that movie, the Michael Myers movie? But thank you, Mitch. I will give you credit where credit is due. I do think that you are a part of the problem. I'm hoping you get reelected, though. What can I say? Some of us are sicker than others. Because it says here in the article, because nominations only require a simple majority, talking about the judges, and Republicans hold a 53 seats, Democrats are powerless to stop them if GOP senators remain united. Well, they got Mitt Romney. I mean, he floats around. He's been probably good on the judges, but wasn't there a blue wave in 2018? Aren't we led to believe that, the Democrats in 2018 that's a sign of what's going to happen in 2020. They just overwhelmed it. But a funny thing happened. They gained seats, which is normal. They didn't gain as many as Obama lost during his first term in office. And President Trump gets no credit for this, although he deserves pretty much 100% credit for this. They not only retained, they being the Republicans, the Senate, but they added a few seats, man. That's almost unheard of. So in reality, yeah, there was a 2018 blue ripple, but wave, no. And guess where it was stopped? Right here in the state of Florida by electing Rick Scott, displacing forever Bill Nelson. Thank you. You're welcome. We gave you a gift in Rick Scott. And of course, Ron DeSantis has proven to be maybe the best governor in the entire country. So he came during that blue wave. So thank you. We could have had, what's his name? The guy that had been packing it pretty hard down in South Florida. I don't even want to talk about his name. Anyway, judicial nominations have become increasingly partisan in the Senate in recent years. They've been increasingly partisan since going back to the Bork days when Justice Bork got thrown out from being on the Supreme Court, didn't make it to the Supreme Court. It's been partisan for a long time, but it really came to a head then. Democrats, and here's something they don't want to hear, and the mainstream media rarely ever talks about this, so I give them a little credit here. Democrats went nuclear in 2013 to nix the 60-vote filibuster for most judicial picks and all executive nominations. A lot of people, they talk about, Merrick Garland, he should have been picked and allowed, Obama should have been allowed to get his pick during the election. Well, guess who gave the Mitch McConnell the permission basically to disallow the Merrick Garland nomination? It was the Democrats led by Joe Biden. They even call it the Biden rule. If you're upset, if you're a progressive out there and you're upset right now that President Trump and Mitch McConnell have teamed up and captured the courts, don't blame them. Blames Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, and the rest of the Democrats who changed the rules in their favor when they thought it was to their interest, and it came back to bite them. So Trump has been doing a great job. I'm looking forward to his 2020 SCOTUS picks when Trump becomes not only unhinged, but unleashed. So we'll move along. We only got a few minutes, but just enough time, I think, to cover this next story. And I got to tell you before I get into it, let me just read the title and then I'll tell you. Scattered to the winds, college students mourn lost semester. And this is a New York Times article. When I first saw this title, because I'm right here in Gainesville, Florida, one of the biggest university communities in the country. University of Florida has like 60,000 students. So I'm very sympathetic to this pandemic shutdown of our universities and what the students themselves are going through. So I was open to being really sympathetic. But as I began to read this article, it really changed my whole tune on it, man. I have to tell you, I was more like, instead of sympathetic, I was, man, why don't you wussies grow a pair, pull yourselves up, wake up, and realize you ain't even got it that bad yet. But here, I digress. Let me hear the article and see what you think. It's a long article, but I'm only going to cover the highlights of it. Scattered to the winds, college students mourn lost semester, New York Times. From his little room in the empty summer camp where he was sheltering from the pandemic like a character in an apocalyptic movie, Joshua McCartney, and I'm not trying to pick on any one individual, wrote a letter to the provost of Denison University where he was a senior. So you can see already, man, they are getting dramatic in this, man, like an apocalyptic movie. His classmates have been scattered to the four winds. They're laying them thick, man. Breaking up the community they depended on for support. They were anxious and stressed, he said, and the university did not seem to get it. Well, I hate to tell you, Mr. McCartney, but the universities are all about the Benjamins, baby. That's all they care about, especially right now. These universities don't have your interest at heart. Do you really believe they have your interest at heart? No, I shouldn't label all of them, but in general, these universities, man, have become basically all about the Benjamins. And, that's what I'm talking about, is that making it rain on them. That's what they want. But he wrote in a letter co-signed by 23 other students, this is what he wrote: the sheer volume of panic attacks, nightmares, and tears that have been related to me in the past 2 weeks is staggering. So the people have been bemoaning the fact that they haven't been able to go to class, the virtual deal ain't working, they can't party and gather and hang out and all that. So the 2 weeks, it's been staggering, man. Please. Please. This is where they started losing me. Come on, man. Like Biden would say, come on, man. You guys, you've been out of school for like 2 months, and it's like the end of the dadgum world. Get real. Young people in this country have faced a whole lot tougher time at your age than they did. My dad, Pearl Harbor happened when he was a senior in college. So, soldiers in combat, these kind of things, this is much worse than anything you guys are going through. Stress and college seem to go hand in hand, but the sudden emptying out of campuses across the United States has increased the anxiety for many students who find themselves isolated from their peers, packed together with their parents, and full of worry over what the future holds. Well, so they're all worried. They're bent out of shape because they can't go to college and hang out in classrooms and bars and everything else. I got a video. I think we're going to be able to play it. I think we might have had a little technical difficulty on a couple of pictures there. But I've got a video that's from Hong Kong in the last couple of days that shows what young people are facing there. And it's a bit more than just being isolated at their parents' house. Check it out. Ladies and gentlemen, when you know what real oppression is, when you know what freedom really means, it's a much different. If the worst of your problems is you had to move back in with your parents, that's probably a more hardship on them than it is you, because these kids in this thing complain continuously about that. But look at those young people in Hong Kong. They're wearing masks, not so much for the virus, but to hide their face from being arrested. They're actually protesting for their absolute freedom, the freedom to even worry about something like going to college. So I get it, kids out there, you snowflakes out there, I get it, and I feel for you. But this story didn't help you very much, because to me, you need to get a reality check. Now, I'm hoping the universities open back up and all your dreams come true. Trust me on that. But the reality is freedom has never been free, and it never will be. Let me check my time. I got about a minute left. Anyway, I listened to all this, and it makes me almost sympathetic to what these companies, about these, what do they call it, H-1B visas. Maybe the reason why these companies are looking, because I'm opposed to that thing, because I think they ought to hire Americans. I really am, 100%. But maybe countries are actually looking at the college grads they're getting right now and saying these guys don't have, the cojones to run a business, because they're staring out the window crying. Maybe I'm overstating it. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed the show as much as I've enjoyed bringing it to you. Please go directly to John Martin Talks Facebook page, like it, and share it with others. I'll pray for your family. You pray for mine. I pray right now that we have peace and patience in our streets about what we talked about in Minneapolis and LA, and let justice actually be served in those cases. I pray for all those people involved in that. But above all else, like I say each and every day, from my heart, from my family to yours, have a blessed day.